At first, I was afraid. I was petrified.
Look at this, a lightsaber.
I kept thinking, how could Respawn follow up on its outstanding Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order? But then I spent so many nights just playing the sequel and seeing how they got it right. And Cal Kestis grew strong. And I learned how to get along. And now we're back in outer space. Okay, don't leave, I'll stop. The point is that with vastly expanded combat options, bigger, more open maps, many more abilities to play with, and enough collectible stuff to fill a Corellian freighter, Star Wars Jedi Survivor is in many ways the Batman Arkham City to Fallen Order's Arkham Asylum. And
that right here is exactly what I wanted to hear. Because again, my biggest frustration with all of this has been that I felt like Jedi Fallen Order was a foundation that was laid, that was super great and proved the concept really, really well, but it didn't feel as though it had like the runway to really get going. It didn't feel like they had the budget to really do what they wanted to do. And it sounds like this is exactly that. Arkham Asylum was really good, but it was very compact, very neat, like lean and focused. And then Arkham City came along and just blew us all away. And it seems like that's what this is. It seems like this is going to be bigger and badder. That's exactly what I was hoping for.
much like those Arkham games did for Batman, nothing else convincingly captures the power fantasy of playing as a Force user quite as well as this.
Get the enemy! Shoot him! We'll do this together.
Especially considering there's no reason not to go back and play Fallen Order before starting Survivor if you haven't, I greatly appreciate that the sequel starts you out with most of the powers and upgrades that Cal had already acquired. There's no corny amnesia or, oh no, my Force powers are gone gimmick to make you relearn how to double jump or use Force push. And no Jawas showed up to steal away the climbing claws that make scaling walls much faster or the Scomp Link that lets BD1 hack things.
It seems like a lot of the footage they're showing, maybe not. Oh, well, actually, yeah. It seems like all the footage they're showing is 30 FPS. Which is fine. I'm just confused why they uploaded it in 1080 60 then, if it's 30 FPS footage.
Your healing canisters and life and Force bar extensions, this is more or less Cal as we left him 5 years prior. So we're already off to an exciting running start when things kick off with a brief caper on Imperial Coruscant. You're quickly thrown right back into Force pushing stormtroopers off ledges and chain into other movement tricks like wall running, climbing, swinging, and sliding down ramps.
My favorite!
And that's just the beginning. The Spider-Man style grapple is introduced before you leave the planet, and the unlocks keep coming from there at a rewarding pace. When you get the mid-air dash ability to pair with your double jump, things really take off. You can cover such crazy distances without touching the ground, changing directions twice to reach things around corners, that I had to completely rethink what was possible.
Look out, Super Mario Odyssey. There's a new player in town. Please tell me Cal unlocks like a little cap he can throw and jump off of. That'd be awesome.
It's not as though Survivor invented the air dash, but Respawn makes excellent use of it and further flexes those Titanfall muscles.
That was close.
Lightsabers are, of course, the stars of the war, and Survivor kicks up the excellent dueling from Fallen Order by several notches with 5 different fighting stances that are all brilliantly animated to create some of the flashiest and fiercest Star Wars melee battles I've ever seen. You don't even have to be all that good at nailing the timing of strikes, parries, and dodges for fights to look spectacular and smooth. And did you notice the arms and legs getting cut off? It's great!
Nice!
Cal's lightsaber has many customizable cosmetic parts, and all of the available blade colors are unlocked shortly after the start, so you can make Cal more your own from the very beginning. That also goes for his blaster and his range of clothing, which is far more extensive this time around, as well as his new haircut and beard options. He'll always be the same Cal Kestis underneath it, but your character will likely have a very different vibe from mine. Yes, it is a little silly to find haircuts and beards in treasure chests, but sure, why not? And I'm just delighted at the customization for our loyal companion BD1. In Fallen Order you could only change his paint job, but just look at all of this, and look at the way his body reacts. It's another lovely little touch in a game that presents so many.
That's good. Little details, man.
But anyway, you can only equip 2 lightsaber stances at a time, which gives your Cal another dose of personality.
They really don't want us inside.
So after dabbling in the single, double-bladed, and dual-wielding stances that carry over, I settled on the 2 new ones. The Kylo Ren inspired crossguard style is like a slow and heavy broadsword that's great for hammering a stunned target into the floor, while the blaster style lets you dispatch small enemies without having to close the gap. It is quite literally a blast.
Wear them down.
So funny!
Pair nicely with the expanded set of force powers that allow you to do things like this. You can, of course, swap out your stances at any meditation circle, but each stance has its own skill tree, so you're encouraged to specialize. By the time I reached the second half of the story, I had my clear favorites and no regrets. The story does the job that it needs to do well. Get you from one exciting action scene to the next. Quite literally by accidentally falling into it, Cal finds himself in a race to locate what's effectively a map to a lost treasure planet.
You should check this out.
That's very much in keeping with him as the Nathan Drake of the Star Wars universe,
What is this?
and it leads to plenty of excuses to visit old abandoned puzzle chambers. It might take you 20 hours or 30 depending on how long you spend taking a detour to get eaten by the damn Rancor and other optional bosses. For me, it was in the 30s. My main
Ouch.
issue with the story is that nearly every big twist is foreshadowed so heavily that it was only ever a matter of when a reveal would happen, not if.
The key we have been searching for.
The identities of the main villains are a secret as of now and shall remain unspoiled here, but they're pretty easy to see coming a light year away. In any case, at least they're written and acted with enough depth that they don't feel like retreads of anyone Cal has faced before. And neither is a two-dimensional Sith Lord who has somehow returned. There's more to them than that, and Survivor successfully prioritizes character over plot for the most part.
Kill him.
Oh no!
Hey, we're all together. Huh?
Yes.
The cast I enjoyed so much in Fallen Order is back in full force to go through those motions. And this time, actor Cameron Monaghan's Cal is not so easily
Cameron Monaghan. I can never remember this dude's name. I'm like, he's the guy from the Thing. You know, he's got like the face. I can never remember his name, but I heard I forgot it. Cameron, because it was like Cal. Cameron McConaughey or something. I don't know.
outshined by the crew of the Mantis. His motivations are about more than simply fighting the Empire now. It's about whether he can live a life where he's something more than a resistance fighter. Let go of his guilt, and find a home that's safe. His path after escaping Order 66 is contrasted against
He wants a safe space for his home. More wokeism, I'll tell you what, right? Cancel the game now.
what it could
It's
have been if
terrible.
He had different priorities and made different choices. Because of that context, his decisions have more weight to them, making him a much more realized protagonist this time around.
Cal, this is BD1.
Why are you cute, little droid?
Naturally, BD-1 never left Cal's side, but the rest of the crew are all given very human reasons for their parting of ways after Fallen Order and why they're coming back together now.
Me, you, the Space Witch, Seer.
Grease's lovable cantankerousness made him a favorite,
You missed the Mantis, huh?
Sure, I was worried about the kind of abuse you were putting it through.
and he's happy to deliver more of that along with some sage wisdom while carefully avoiding overuse of his catchphrase.
All right, make like a rock and quit moving around my cabin.
Marin returns and immediately rekindles the romantic chemistry between herself and Cal,
Ooh.
and riding her teleporting coattails leads to Survivor's single most thrilling action sequence. And though she's less of a constant presence due to Cal no longer needing a mentor, the ever-intense Sayer is more powerful than ever, and that's memorably on display in one of the story's biggest moments.
We both have our roles to play in this struggle.
Aside from a large cast of colorful alien side characters, the other new member of the group is Bode.
He's a friend.
Bode.
Nice to finally meet you.
He's another roguish mercenary type who, much like Cal did in Fallen Order, initially comes off somewhat blandly as the two bro it up to establish the friendship they've struck up fighting the Empire off-screen together. As his backstory is fleshed out, however, he does become a more interesting companion.
I don't get to see her as often as I'd like, but at least I can provide for her.
Fighting alongside allies on certain story missions this time around is a treat, especially watching Marin blink around the battle and pick off targets. They don't need babysitting because they can't be hurt, but you can have them prioritize an annoying enemy. Beyond that, they're only really used to open up paths for you to reach new areas when prompted.
How's this?
but their banter and companionship definitely liven up scenes in a way that BD1's adorable bleeps and whoops couldn't do alone.
Here's some for me.
That's cool.
Of
Team
course, with new
finishers?
friends must also come new enemies. And following a whole game of battling mostly Imperial Inquisitors, it's a relief to see that the Empire's role here is more in the background. Their parade of trooper types and security droids are mostly here to provide variety after you've been fighting the main enemy army of raiders and their salvaged separatist battle droids. It's a clever way to plausibly merge the original and prequel trilogy enemies together in the same game.
Impressive dexterity.
There's also no shortage of beasts that resemble what we saw in Fallen Order. No matter where you go in the Star Wars galaxy, it seems life always finds a way to make giant bugs and big angry wampas.
Whack.
It's a good mix of enemies and subtypes that builds on the previous game's already respectable lineup.
That one hurt just to
And when I find
watch.
myself in the middle of a fray where different factions are battling it out, including any weak-minded foes I temporarily force confuse over to my side, it's a great time. On the subject of creatures, one of Cal's many new abilities is to ride mounts. Though that isn't ever really used for much besides galloping across big empty areas slightly faster than Cal could have run on foot. There's also a flying animal that can be used as a glider, though only at very specific points, so it's not much of a game changer either, but it does play nicely into environmental puzzles. Speaking of environments, this journey takes us to a handful of never-before-seen planets, some of which are expansive and include a variety of extremely different areas within them. Your new home base world of Kobo, for instance, has everything from grassland to swamp to underground facilities, a crass separatist ship, and even its own version of Cloud City. They're far from the typical Star Wars one-note worlds like Tatooine or the forest moon of Endor.
This place is in ruins.
Every time I entered a new area, I'd circle the camera, looking for telltale signs the level designers leave to indicate a wall is runnable, a ceiling can be clung to, a crack can be squeezed through, and more. These levels are meticulously thought out puzzles in and of themselves, and only rarely did I run across something that didn't feel intuitive or fair once I took into account all of the tools at my disposal.
I'm on, Gabs.
Considering that this adventure is roughly equal parts combat and puzzle solving, the fact that there's such a broad selection of types works in its favor. Puzzles that deal with directing energy beams and even painting paths are clever and well done, on par and sharing some ideas with a lot of what we saw in God of War Ragnarok last year. They aren't groundbreaking in their design, but they're consistently fun nonetheless.
As long as he doesn't ramble and tell you the answer right as you get there, I'm down. Like, that was a problem with God of War Ragnarok that they eventually patched out, was that, like, you know, you get stuck on a puzzle and then Atreus or, whoever, Mimir, will be like, oh, maybe you look up there, brother. And then it moves the camera and points you right at the solution. Or it says, I wonder if I could smash that box with my arrow and then activate the blah, blah, blah. And it just spoils it. It just, like, ruins it. Eventually they patched it. So those lines were delivered instead of like 30 seconds into a puzzle, they were delivered like 3 minutes into a puzzle, just to, like, you know, make it less super annoying. But as long as they don't do that here, I'm down. Just like, if you're going to give me a puzzle, make it a puzzle. Yeah, a button that requests help, something like that. I think that's what they had in Fallen Order, if I recall correctly. So if they do that, I think that works way better. Totally agree.
Starting to think we're in the right place.
Throughout it all, Survivor is a gorgeous game with beautifully detailed environments and characters, and perhaps as a result, not one of the best performing. My PS5 playthrough saw some fairly gnarly slowdowns from the expected 30 frames per second in 4K quality mode, especially when fighting around smoke or fog, which made timing my parries and dodges difficult. Disappointingly, even the 1440p performance mode, which most of this review footage is recorded in, isn't close to holding a locked 60 frames per second. I also saw a few crashes and bugs that forced me to quit and reload my saves to progress. EA says the day one patch will come with improvements on all platforms, but if history is any guide, it might take a little while before that's completely ironed out. A smooth frame rate is certainly important when battling Survivor's multiple lightsaber-wielding bosses, because there is no shortage of challenge in learning the timing of parrying their strikes and dodging their unblockable attacks. I confess, after a few hours of banging my head against the brutal final boss, I finally resorted to turning the difficulty down a notch so I could see the ending in time for this review. That said, there's not a lot that felt especially novel
Noob!
about these fights. They're well made, but mostly conventional, and one aspect that hasn't seen a great improvement over Fallen Order. When it comes to tracking down those bosses in the first place, I certainly appreciate that the Jedi games give you a map, but it does leave something to be desired when it comes to usability. Just like in Fallen Order, this seems so dedicated to the idea of resembling a light blue Star Wars hologram that it's not always easy to figure out what you're looking at, and the directions its waypoints give you aren't always accurate. However, its dotted lines were generally good enough to point me in the right direction when I struggled to find a path forward or was feeling lost.
It's like the Dead Space mini-map all over again. It's like, what the hell is this trying to tell me?
Also, this time Respawn has granted us the ability to fast travel between save points, which feels like an act of mercy when the objective is on the other side of one of these large labyrinthian maps.
That was such a small, weird choice, because in Fallen Order, you couldn't, like, you know, in this case, there's a point over here that you need to go to, but you're all the way over here, and in order to get over there, you have to run through waves of enemies, climb over walls, run on wall, do whatever. And it was just overly tedious. And sometimes there's good reason for that. Like Red Dead Redemption 2 notably had a fast travel system, but a lot of people finished all of Red Dead 2 without even realizing there was a fast travel option in the form of those like buggies that you can go to in Saint-Denis and places like that outside of like train stations. And I think that was intentional because like they have this huge world. They want you to be immersed and to explore just finding it yourself. They don't want you to like be held back by giving you the option to run around and skip all of that exploration. Sometimes, as I've said before, if a player has the ability to abuse a mechanic, they'll abuse it. If they have the ability to abuse fast travel, they'll abuse it. If they have the ability to abuse a quick save, quick load thing to get the dialogue option they want, they're going to do it. Like, love it or hate it, people will do it because it's a game and that's what people do. They use the mechanics the game gives you to play the game and to get the desired outcome. And it's the game designer's job to balance that out and make sure that they don't ruin the experience for themselves. It's why, like, I don't tend to love difficulty sliders and things that can be hot swapped and dropped in real time, because in my mind, that's kind of an excuse for lazy developers for like balance. For example, like the Horizon Burning Shores DLC, if you run into like a boss encounter that's really, really tough, like you can just drop it all the way down to story mode, get the boss like taken care of, and then just raise it back up. Easy. And that means that like the developers never really have to worry too much about balancing that encounter for the player, because they're like, well, if it's a little too hard, you know, the get good, really try hard players, they'll pound their head against the wall and then do a perfect run after 10 hours of practice and they'll kill him on that higher difficulty. But people who don't want to do that are going to drop the difficulty and be able to get through it just fine, you know, so don't worry about balancing it too much. It's why I have so much respect for like From Software, where From will actually balance every boss encounter the same equally for everybody. There's no real time dropping of difficulty modes or any of that crap. It's just like, yeah, figure it out. Figure it out. I don't know what to tell you. Figure it out. And I respect that a lot. And in this case, it seems like this is a much more approachable game, kind of like Horizon, where they're trying to build it in a way where if you want the try-hard experience, you can find it and pound your head against the wall for hours against boss fights. But if you want the lighthearted Star Wars romp in the hay, you can have that here too. And honestly, there's a place for more casualistic games. I think that's fine. But it does, in my mind, put a cap on the potential of the combat system, because that level of fine-tuning for boss difficulty, animations, hitboxes, that stuff just never happens, because they always can just be like, well, the player can just drop the difficulty, whatever. And to hear that the bosses aren't notably improved is a little bit of a bummer. As long as there's more of them, I'm happy, but it's a little bit of a bummer that they're not putting a little more effort into the boss fights. You know, that's a little bit. Red Dead World is actually fun to walk around, though, because of the random interactions that would happen. Even sleeping in a campfire could create a random encounter. Well, that's true, New Kid. And they designed the whole game understanding that most people if they want to go from Saint Denis to Strawberry or Saint Denis up into the mountains, they're going to go, or Valentine, whatever. They're going to go and ride their horse or buy a train ticket and ride the train all the way up, and it's going to take them a while. And because they understand players are going to do that, they can pace everything out. They can design the whole experience around that because they know what they're dealing with. In Jedi Fallen Order, it always felt like there wasn't any cool thing. You're just running through the levels again that you've already done. And one of the issues with, Soulsborne style games or Metroidvania style games is that when you task the player with just going through an area again and you don't give them the option to fast travel around, what inevitably happens is players just sprint past every boss, every mini boss, every enemy encounter that spawns. Like they just sprint through them. Like we've all seen it where you just, I need to run from this area of the map over here and I need to get to this one, but I can't fast travel. So I'm just going to sprint past everything. And we've all done it, because why would you fight every single enemy that pops up and spawns along the way? Why would you bother that? Bother with that? It just would be a waste of time unless you're that desperate for, like, I don't remember the currency, whatever the currency is from killing enemies in this. And honestly, whenever, maybe this is unfair of me, but whenever I see a player like actively avoiding interactions in games, that to me seems like a bad thing. Like if I give you the ability, maybe what would be like Hogwarts Legacy, they give you these mounts. You can ride a hippogriff, you can ride that around, or you can get access to the big Graphorn and ride that around. If you use that once and then you never touch it again, it seems to me like something went wrong, right? Like that shouldn't have happened. Because what should happen is they give you the option to do something cool, and then you do that something cool for an extended period of time. You're just like, oh, this is great. I love it. But when a game introduces a system or some mechanic that you use a little bit and then you never touch it again, or you actively avoid it, that to me is a problem. Even in Horizon Burning Shores, like they give you the option to use the Sunwing and fly that around. But the thing flies so freaking slow. It's just easier to fast travel around. It's ridiculous. Anyway, I'll shut up.
They're dense, too. Survivor is packed full of things to do around the edges of the main story, including bounty hunters and legendary creatures to track down and kill, combat challenges, and more. Some of those are seriously...
Dude, it's so Arkham City, it's not even funny. Because this is something that they did a little bit in Arkham Asylum, and then they brought like timed challenges to get through 50 enemies or to build your combo counter to 100 or whatever the challenge was. And like I spent so much time in Arkham City doing all of that. And so it's funny to see all of the little inspirations taken from that. That's awesome.
It's tough, even on the default Jedi Knight difficulty. On top of all that, there's just an intimidating amount of stuff to collect. And yes, there is a new game plus.
I'm sure the Emperor won't mind if I deliver you to him in pieces.
What?
Star Wars Jedi Survivor takes what Fallen Order achieved and wall runs with it, then double jumps and air dashes straight into an epic lightsaber battle. Rather than double...
Oh, it's a glass floor. My brain broke for a second. I was like, he's just standing on the open air?
Jumps
What?
and air dashes straight into an epic lightsaber battle. Rather than taking us back to square one to begin Cal's journey as a Padawan again, we're trusted with control of a full-fledged Jedi Knight, who we can grow into a master of superhuman mobility and fantastic and challenging combat. With a new set of larger, more diverse, and densely packed worlds to explore and a memorable cast of returning characters, Survivor tells a story that may be predictable at times, but is still fun and emotional to watch play out. Launch performance issues aside, it's a sequel that does virtually everything better than the original, which was already an exceptional Star Wars game. If Respawn makes one more like this, it'll be the best Star Wars trilogy in 30 years, hands down.
In 30 years? What was 30 years ago? What's the other best Star Wars game? Or does he mean including the movies? Is that what he's saying? But even that would be more like 40 years, right? Because the original Star Wars was in like 78 or something. Ozzy, good to see you, my friend. PC performance is the biggest downside by far. It's an incredible game. That's good. Who did a PC review? Does anybody know of somebody that did a PC review? Jedi Survivor PC review. PC Gamer, I bet. I bet they did a PC review. That's probably a safe bet, right?
Star Wars Jedi Survivor is arriving at a time when there's too much Star Wars, and most of it's not good. The Mandalorian has gotten too cheesy for its own good. The Boba Fett and Obi-Wan shows were toothless side stories, and
how dare you? I haven't seen any of these.
Enthusiasm around.
I have no idea. In general, I like Star Wars has potential, but growing up with a name like Luke, I've received so many horrible dad jokes, people thinking they're really, really funny, by pretending they're my father and stuff. I've just been burned out on it. It just doesn't work. But that being said, I do think Star Wars has a lot of potential, and when it works really freaking well. But Star Wars really exhibits a lot of the problems of like typical Disney franchises, where they're bought out and then they're turned giga corporate, and they just pump out 15 different variations of it to see what sticks. And I just don't have that much interest in it as a franchise. I'm worried they're doing the same thing with Harry Potter now that they're doing an HBO show too. That worries me. That worries me. I don't know. I guess we'll see. That's a topic for another time though. I mean, seriously though, what are the odds that the Harry Potter HBO show turns out even decent? What are maybe it's awesome if they actually stick to like the books and just make it the movies but bigger and badder. That could be great, but my fear is that they're gonna come in and then like they're gonna do that thing where, oh, and Hermione was actually a fish the whole time. I never said she wasn't a fish, so she's a fish now. And then Ron is actually a racist. I never said he wasn't, but it's the duality of somebody who's ginger who's also a raging racist. And like they're just gonna start tossing in stuff like that to try and make it more mature. I'm not into it, but we'll anyway. Topic for another day.
And the next wave of movies feels at best muted. Jedi Survivor puts on a brave face during the darkest chapter of Star Wars history, finds humor in an unfair world, and sometimes succumbs to helplessness. It's not a story about fighting the Empire as much as coping with its dominance, grappling with the futility of rebellion, and questioning what's left to fight for. The modern Star Wars media that this feels closest to is Andor, though it's not as ambitious in its storytelling or as cynical. Unfortunately though, those themes take a backseat through the majority of the story, while Cal Kestis and crew entertain the deranged tantrums of a skin-deep evil guy with a red lightsaber, reminding us that this is still Uncharted in space. But man, is it damn good at being space Uncharted. Maybe even better in some ways, because Jedi Survivor breaks free of the Naughty Dog trends 2019's Fallen Order chased. Yes, Cal climbs up crumbling buildings and swings on ropes, but he also double jumps, air dashes, wall runs, and grapple hooks all over the place. There's an almost
I mean, if it's just Uncharted with a Star Wars coat of paint and Titanfall movement, I'm down. Like, who wouldn't be down for that? Doesn't that just sound awesome? Harry Potter starring Chris Pratt as Dobby. Dude, I'd watch it. More realistically, imagine if they cast The Rock as Dobby. Master has given Dobby a song. Dobby, smash. Dude, I think it'd be awesome. I think it'd be great. Rocky, I think you'd freaking love Titanfall, especially if you like Destiny and like quality shooters. Dude, you're gonna love Titanfall. Go play Titanfall 2. It'll blow your mind. Kevin Hart is Dobby. They like he walks on the set one day and he's like, so how are you gonna do like the prosthetics, or how are you gonna do like the animation to make me really small? They're like, oh no, we're just gonna do like facial capture, but height wise you're set. We're just gonna do that. It'd be so great. I don't know. You know what? You guys have convinced me. Maybe this HBO series is going to be amazing. Maybe it's going to be great. Let's see. Worst thing about playing on PC is that it didn't matter if the settings were low or epic. The frames dropped in certain areas all the same. I don't know if that would even be a shader thing, because It depends, like, if it got better, like, as you played more, if it was one of those things where, like, the first time you see the smoke effect, it stutters, and then the next time you see it, it doesn't. That would be shader compilation, like Callisto Protocol had. But if it's just, like, weird random drops when you reach certain areas, that to me is just data management. It's just the streaming tech isn't working quite right. Maybe a VRAM issue, yeah, I guess. Because if it's... But even that... It's got to be a software issue on the processing side of the data, because if it's a VRAM issue, you would think it would be better, like if you're running a 4090 with 24 gigs of VRAM versus like a 4 gig card, you know? Michael Caine as Dumbledore. That would actually be pretty great. Is it a stable 60 on console? No, at least not right now. That's what the IGN reviewer was saying. It looked like he was playing on PS5, and he said even on the performance mode, it was pretty unstable. But they say it's going to be fixed on launch, but they said that last time too. It only has FSR 2 at launch too. Really? They didn't even get like DLSS stuff kicked in? Maybe they have a marketing deal with them or something with AMD. Does it run better than The Last of Us? Probably. J.K. Rowling as Voldemort, she just takes the role on herself. I decided I would just do this myself. I think it will work much better.
Equal ratio of combat to platforming, and both these things are fun this time. Jedi Survivor revisits an era when third-person action games were designed like jungle gyms, bottomless death pits flanked by that special kind of wall you can climb on, platforms that move for no reason at all, floating balloons that slingshot you across the sky. Respawn has resurrected the big-budget 3D platformer, and it is wonderful. A huge portion of the game takes place in the hub world of Koboh, and that's where a lot of the platforming is. It's deep, wide, and technically an open world, but not a boundless sandbox. It's more a collection of linear levels spoked off from a common center. A PS1 or PS2 style platformer without the loading screens, basically.
That looks fun.
The only thing Jedi Survivor is missing are trails of floating gems or coins to draw my eye to optional areas. Rewards are usually underwhelming perks.
Wow.
A new pair
Look
of
at that movement, though.
a tiny health bar upgrade, but Koboh's mini dungeons and environmental puzzles are fun enough that I sort them out constantly. Respawn has come a long way from Fallen Order's lethargic moveset. The one aspect of Jedi Survivor that hasn't been reimagined, but I don't really think needs to be, is combat. It's still satisfying to chop up stormtroopers with a lightsaber, and even better now that droids are in the mix too. Cal has gotten a lot more lethal with a saber in the last 5 years that we've time skipped through. Limbs are chopped off from heavy attacks, and sometimes Cal will unholster a blaster for a finishing execution that I assume he learned watching John Wick. Oh yeah, by the way, Cal has a blaster now. It's one of the 2 new saber stances new to Jedi Survivor for a total of 5. I'm impressed at how Respawn has managed to make what is essentially the same saber feel like 5 distinct weapons. Each stance has a unique moveset and its own upgrade tree with inherent trade-offs. The blaster has a nice give and take that's consistent.
This guy's way
every
better
stance.
at the game than the PC, or than the IGN guy. He's way better. He's actually hitting his parries and stuff. He looks way, way better. Let's see. I refunded Dead Island 2. $80 was too much. I think Gabe wasn't as fun as I expected. Oh, that's too bad, Gimbus. That's too bad. But I mean, thankfully there is the ability to refund. So if it's not working for you, you can do that. I'm having fun with
most
it, though.
weaknesses can be smoothed out with upgrade points. After maxing out the blaster tree and equipping a few complementary perks, I managed to clear entire rooms without swinging a saber. Definitely the Jedi equivalent of a cheesy magic build in Elden Ring, but I feel no shame. The only thing that threatened to ruin my good time was the constant performance issues with the PC version. Even with Nvidia's latest driver specifically optimized for this game, my frame rate regularly slow to a crawl at very annoying moments. Stepping through doors sometimes triggers double-digit frame rate drops for 10 seconds or more. Cutscenes often plummet to 15 or 20 FPS, cut off or overlap dialogue, and usually don't recover until I get control back. Performance in most open parts of Koboh are pretty bad too. On an RTX 2080 Super, I was lucky to squeeze a 35 FPS average. Isolated levels ran flawlessly at 80 to 90.
On what resolution, though?
90 FPS, so there's clearly something up with the way Respawn is drawing big spaces. Fiddling with graphics options didn't help much either. The only upscaling available was FSR 2.0, which usually failed to improve my FPS but always succeeded in making Cal's face blurry and unintelligible in motion. I've never missed DLSS more. For what it's worth, I played a non-final version of Jedi Survivor. There's a pre-release patch coming a few days before launch, and among the patch notes EA shared with press is performance improvements across all platforms. Hopefully it'll help, but I'd be surprised if all of those frame rate drops just disappeared overnight. We appear to be living in a brown age of bad PC ports. But unacceptable performance aside, the good news is I still had a great...
Jeez, 15 frames during cutscenes. Like, that's crazy. Drops to 15 frames and it doesn't recover. He said it was so bad that it even would cause, like, it would cause lines of dialogue to be skipped because it couldn't catch up. That's rough, man. He took my thing.